Imagine waking up, pouring your morning coffee, and casually finding out that the US and the Soviet Union are literally prepping for an all-out nuclear war. Sounds insane, right? But that wasn't a drill back in October 1962. That was just reality. Today we're diving into an explainer on the Cuban Missile Crisis, the day the world almost ended.
Now, I really want to emphasize something right off the bat. This wasn't some Hollywood thriller. When we watch a movie, it's easy to kind of shrug off that doomsday clock because we figure the good guys usually win. But this actually happened. The stakes were absolute. The people with their fingers hovering over the launch buttons were operating under unimaginable sleep-deprived stress.
So how on earth did the world get this incredibly close to the edge? And how did we manage to step back from it? To really understand the save, we've got to understand the setup.
All right, so picture this. It's the absolute height of the Cold War. You've got these two massive superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, fiercely competing for global dominance. But they aren't fighting directly. Why? Because of one huge, terrifying equalizer: nuclear arsenals. Everyone understood that if either side actually launched a strike, it meant totally mutually assured destruction. Just complete catastrophe for everyone. It was a terrifyingly fragile balance.
And man, that delicate balance shattered fast. Back in January 1959, Fidel Castro takes power in Cuba, and things with Washington get hostile pretty much overnight. Well, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev sees a golden strategic opportunity here. By early 1962, he's secretly, and I mean top secretly, shipping nuclear missiles to the island. It's the perfect covert op, right up until October 14th, when an American U-2 spy plane snaps clear photos of the missile sites being built. Suddenly, Washington has a very undeniable, very massive problem on its hands.
You might be wondering, why would Khrushchev risk it? Well, honestly, it was a high-stakes game of geopolitical catch-up. See, the US already had nuclear missiles parked in Europe, literally right on the Soviet doorstep. So from Moscow's perspective, sneaking missiles into Cuba, that was just leveling the playing field. High risk, high reward. Until they got caught.
So, those spy photos land on President Kennedy's desk, and he is handed a practically impossible choice. Half his advisors are basically screaming to bomb the sites immediately, take out the threat. But the other half, they're warning that an airstrike absolutely guarantees World War III. Try to imagine the crushing weight of that decision for a second. Kennedy decides he has to try and thread the needle with a wildly stressful middle ground approach.
He decides to squeeze the Soviets economically and militarily, but without firing that first shot. On October 22nd, Kennedy announces a naval quarantine on Cuba. It was basically a blockade, though they were careful not to use that exact word legally. They're stopping Soviet ships in their tracks. For days, the entire world just holds its breath. Missiles are primed. Warships are literally staring each other down in the Atlantic Ocean. Nobody has any clue what the other side is going to do. The tension was just agonizing, until a breakthrough message finally drops on October 26th.
But here's the crazy part. While the guys in suits are in Washington and Moscow debating grand strategy, the reality out on the ground was terrifyingly unpredictable. Communication back then was incredibly slow. In fact, there was a Soviet submarine commander out there getting hit by U.S. depth charges who genuinely thought the war had already started. He was seconds away from launching a nuclear torpedo. Literally seconds. He was only stopped because a single dissenting officer talked him down. Just think about that. One sleep-deprived guy in a tin can almost ended the world.
And the diplomacy? Yeah, not exactly straightforward either. Remember that October 26th message? Khrushchev offers a deal. He says, "We'll pull our missiles if you promise not to invade Cuba." Okay, a glimmer of hope, right? But before Kennedy can even take a breath, a second, much more aggressive message arrives. Now, Khrushchev is demanding that the U.S. also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. Bam! Just like that, the price of peace went way, way up.
So how do you solve a global standoff where neither side can possibly afford to look weak on the world stage? You cut a back-alley deal. Publicly, the United States agrees not to invade Cuba, which lets Khrushchev look like the great protector of his ally. But privately, under the table, Kennedy agrees to pull those Jupiter missiles out of Turkey. The Soviet Union then agrees to remove their missiles from Cuba. It was an absolute masterclass in compromise. And slowly, thankfully, the world backed away from the ledge.
There's a saying that sometimes history changes because leaders decide not to fight. Both of these men were under crushing, unimaginable pressure from their own generals to just hit the launch button. Choosing restraint over ego and compromise over escalation, that might just be the most historically significant thing either of them ever did.
Surviving this near miss actually changed how the world operated. Both sides kind of woke up and realized that relying on telegrams, which took like 12 hours to decode during a literal nuclear standoff, was a terrible, terrible idea. So this crisis actually gave birth to the famous Washington-Moscow hotline. It was a direct communication link to make sure leaders could talk instantly, to stop anyone from accidentally ending civilization over a simple misunderstanding.
We'll probably never know exactly how close we came to the midnight hour during those 13 days in October, but it proves something absolutely crucial. When heavily armed superpowers clash, the mechanics of war are terrifyingly fragile. A single misunderstood radar blip or one overly anxious submarine commander can change the world forever. Peace isn't just some default setting. It's something that has to be actively negotiated and maintained every single day.
Which kind of leaves us with this thought. Sometimes the ultimate victory in history isn't winning a war, it's preventing one. Kennedy and Khrushchev pulled it off in '62. But looking at today's geopolitical chessboard and the massive modern arsenals out there, how close are we right now? It's definitely something worth thinking about. If you enjoyed geeking out on this history with me today, stick around for more. Thanks for joining this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.